fucking goddamn motherfucking dildos, piss, and that fuck. How you like that shit, Fox? I don't swear in my videos because I don't want someone to use it as reason to not take my words and points seriously over it. It's a personal choice I made when I started this channel. Catch me offline and I can swear like a pirate, especially after I spend all of 4 hours listening to the Procrastinators podcast. And just as I don't think swearing is inherently bad, choosing not to isn't either. But what is a problem is when, say, you're a TV network looking to put on a live theater performance that adheres to cable content guidelines, and you choose to do a show that specifically contains elements you'd have to censor out to do so. We saw this when Fox did Rocky Horror and turned it into a sanitized sexless drag, and that's what they did again with Rent. The sexual interactions between Maureen and Joanne are so over the top that no one could really believe these two are legit into each other physically. Maureen doesn't get to moon Benny and Mr. Grey, and lines are changed to the point of ineffectiveness. Going from fucking weird to super weird in the Tango Maureen has far less punch. Not only does fucking have harsher consonant sounds that punctuate Mark's uneasiness, but the change sanitized his language to the point of being unrealistic. It's the exception to find a young adult in New York who doesn't swear, especially when they seek to go against societal norms. I'm so disappointed the homeless woman's lines were made clean as well because it bastardizes how Mark was making her feel. She's angry and humiliated, but it doesn't come across when the harshest word she says is damn. What is so wrong with dildos that it had to be changed to latex? Can you really not say piss on TV? Changing piss on your stoop every night to puke on your stoop every night seems senseless and not reflective of reality. In any major metropolitan area, the most notable thing about public transit stations is the smell of urine. Rarely puke, as it's more of a problem to find a public restroom when you're homeless than a place to barf. And then not only did they take all the fun and energy out of La Vie Boheme, they felt the need to change the little interlude right before Mimi and Roger's song. Instead of continuing to mock Benny for calling Bohemia dead, they went with assigning roles to Bohemia's heads of state. It's very clunky and obviously not natural to the song or written to match. And again, a sanitized version of what it replaced. Was there really a problem with saying erection clad only in bubble wrap or even modeling the latest fashions from Paris? The only part kept mostly intact was the portion directly leading up to the cast shouting, which of course they had to leave in as this production really spotlit the AIDS epidemic, but it's also hurt by the fact that the person playing Angel's voice was falling apart during it. But more on her later. Also bewildering is how this production gives less focus to the homeless population than the show already allots them. In the second act, there's supposed to be a small interlude of the homeless characters we saw from Act 1 singing about how they're still struggling and in need even after a year passing, and that none of that has changed, best noted in the lines, "No room at the Holiday Inn again. How time flies when compassion dies." But here, that bit is cut. And the line about how time flies when compassion dies is moved up to the song Christmas Bells, again, becoming ineffective. The context is removed, also taking away its meaning. Anyone new to the show won't understand what is meant as no more than a day has passed in-universe. Especially being Fox, it really makes me cynically wonder why they'd opt to take the spotlight away from the homeless characters. Another alteration that bothers me is the changing of Angel from a drag queen to a trans woman. On the one hand, trans issues and visibility is very relevant right now, so it's a good way to make yourself seem progressive by having a trans character. And even less cynically, trans representation is vitally important. Anything to humanize such a misunderstood and disregarded part of our population is appreciated. But why take representation away from drag queens? Another group often the target of hate and bigotry, particularly after casting a famous drag queen. Drag queens don't get much in mainstream media either. The most I know them for are for phrases like, girlfriend, or, oh honey. It's important to show men being secure in their gender identity, but also enjoying presenting feminine at times because, needless to say, it's still a very taboo thing to be in the US, not to mention much of the world. I have to wonder why the change was made. If I'm trying to be generous, I can see it being caused by a desire to make the show relevant to modern audiences who have trans issues on their minds, wanting to slightly modernize this work meant for late 90s audiences. Maybe the character would have been trans if freshly written today, and only wasn't at the time because the way people, even in the LGBT+ community, thought about gender categories was different back then. Then, when I consider the removal of swears and other elements considered too taboo for TV like dildos, I have to wonder if the reason isn't more sinister. I can't help but be reminded of places in the world where being trans is preferable to acting outside of gender norms, where religious and governmental structures will support your transition so that you can embody society's expectations of your gender, an acceptance that is conditional upon you fitting neatly into pre-established boxes. Maybe I'm reading too much into the change, and at worst it's an erosion of drag queen representation, but I wouldn't put it past Fox to follow this conditional acceptance mindset. And as I explore this thought, I'm struck by another change that turns sinisterly cloying the more I consider it. In this production, a notable focus is put on the AIDS crisis itself. Unlike in other versions, Mark narrates the toll the virus has taken on the world as of 1991, and how dire the situation was for those infected. Seasons of Love is performed mainly by the life support group, and they're mainly featured throughout the show, even appearing at Angel's funeral. But as in past iterations of Rent, there is a notable lack of mention why so many are dying, why the virus has been allowed to kill and infect practically unopposed, and that the only hope available to those with AIDS costs far more than most could afford. Because to indict those responsible would be to open the door to criticizing and fighting that system that still exists today. Drug companies and corporations in business for profit to the point of withholding literally life-saving medications. Politicians more than happy to moralize and act as spectator to a plague affecting groups that don't keep them in power. With the increased attention put on the crisis, it becomes less excusable to romanticize and purposely omit the most important realities of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. You can't have emotional moments lamenting how many have died without recognizing the fact that they weren't just unlucky, they were allowed to die. As Lindsay Ellis put in her own video about Rent, a show about those left behind by the system isn't necessarily required to seek to change the system. But because Rent does stand in opposition to the powers that be, its lack of advocacy or demanding of change is one of its biggest problems. And by specifically talking about the tragedy of the AIDS epidemic, Rent Live makes a mockery of itself and the message that it claims to have when it only gives a sanitized picture that is easiest to swallow. You can't sugarcoat a problem and then claim to be a champion for its resolution. Really, these are what bothered me most about Rent Live. But that's not to say they weren't the only issues with the production. I think it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. The thing most of you watching know about this live version, or should I say not so live version. The biggest takeaway from my high school theater experience is that no performance is perfect. That's just the nature of putting on a live show. You can come very near, but something will always be off. Even if it's small, like placing a prop in the way of your lead actor, making him fall, cutting his arm on stage, and then having to gaff tape the wound so it wouldn't bleed while he performs the finale. Sometimes you get lucky and the fall fits the scene because he's currently fighting a big alien plant, but it doesn't always work out so nicely. Brendan Hunn, who played Roger, unfortunately injured one of his legs during rehearsal and had to wear a cast, understandably preventing him from performing in full. While the live audience experienced the show with Hunt in a wheelchair, television viewers saw a recorded dress rehearsal that was never meant to air up until the final scene in Curtain Call with the original Broadway cast, done live where Hunt sat with his leg propped up. As the theater phrase goes, the show must go on, but the situation was notably poorly handled. For one, the recording wasn't good. It was marred with technical issues like audio imbalances and channel drops that could have easily been fixed or mitigated in short time by an audio engineer. The camera had a nauseating habit of spinning around the catch, which I think is safe to assume would have been present in the intended live production, and certain performers sounded like they were not in good voice or that they were trying not to overexert before the big day. I can understand not wanting to ruin your voice on the day before the show, but that's why you don't air the dress rehearsal. If you really want a recorded backup at the ready, film a rehearsal done at the performer's full strengths, not where they're purposely holding back, thus making people think that there has been some miscasting when someone can't hit their notes. But then looks like that this was the recorded backup, as there was effort taken to tape the rehearsal, and it was done in front of a live audience. And I've gotta say, I would have been very disappointed if I was sitting in on this rehearsal, not experiencing the best of these honestly talented performers. Then this also poses a question, where's Roger's understudy? In live theater, you must always be ready for all possibilities like illness or injury. Things that you can't plan for but have preparations in place just in case. Did Fox not care enough to spend the money on backup performers? Were they so reliant on stunt casting that they figured name recognition outweighed quality? That's how it gets Sound of Music live. It seems that at every prompt to action, Fox twiddled their thumbs and did the least work, assuming we wouldn't care enough to notice. But notice we did, especially when the show didn't have the live label shield that would excuse minor technical issues or things you can account for in live theater. By leaving in the live experience of their recording, it made the showrunners seem inept at best and downright careless at worst, and shines a light on other failings like not having an understudy in the wings. Something similar happened with the Carlotta in the 25th anniversary production of Phantom of the Opera. The original actress got sick and her voice was affected, and a backup was called in so last minute that the names on the programs couldn't be changed. And the show went very, very well. You could hardly guess from watching her performance that she wasn't always intended for the role. True, the backup was already familiar with the part as she was the current Carlotta in the West End production, but the people in charge understood how important the show was and had a plan for such a situation. Something Fox apparently didn't, past airing an inferior version of the show audiences expected. And even after these broader problematic decisions and changes, this version itself isn't all that good. La Vie Boheme, one of my favorite numbers for its catchiness, is notably weak and lacking of energy. It feels toned down, like when you're trying to not make noise in a library. It sounds slowed and quiet, like when the cast weekly demands wine and beer! This problem is present in Christmas Bells as well. The end of the song is supposed to build towards a climax that is paid off with Maureen's entrance, but it comes off as a leisurely sung number that just ends. None of the excitement or the chaos of so many people and stories being told in one small part of the world. I hate that the actors sometimes play to the crowd, needlessly breaking the fourth wall, like in What You Own, where Roger and Mark are constantly interacting with the audience. Hell, it looks like some of the audience members were planted in there to prompt others to cheer and so that Mark and Roger can crowd surf. Jesus Christ Superstar also had moments of audience interaction, but only because it made sense for Jesus to recognize an excited crowd to underline his popularity, or for King Herod to display his greater-than-thou attitude through riling his many praising fans. Rent doesn't have moments like these, so it seems like a needless gimmick here. It's adorably awkward when Mark stands uncomfortably while Maureen gets into her harness, but he's supposed to be filming her performance. How could he help out and capture the footage that's supposed to get him recognized by Buzzline? And I hate to say it, but I found Valentina to be one of the weakest cast members. Now again, part of this is on the higher-ups, like whoever choreographed her song to be so lacking in energy, and she could have been saving her vocal cords for the big day, hence the many times her voice cracks, scratches, and her notes are underwhelming. But after listening to the soundtrack that Fox finally released, she doesn't sound all that much better. As stated before, she cannot perform Angel's line that leads into the cast shouting, "Fight AIDS," without her voice failing.
Of MIT virtual reality equipment to self-destruct as it broadcasts the word.
It sounded painful for her. The high notes in Today For You are just barely hit, if not sounding labored like the rest were singing in it. Her voice is decent, even good in some parts where she doesn't have to access her upper range, make me wonder if she has been sick with something affecting her vocal cords. Jordan Fisher, who plays Mark, has a sweet and lovely voice, but it's not right for the role. It's most notable in La Vie Boheme, where his singing is very smooth and less rock sounding than the song calls for. It's just too produced and clean. Very fitting of the current popular style of singing, but not for the song itself. It's a shame that this production was so flawed because the cast is extremely talented and I want to see them in more shows, especially Vanessa Hudgens and Brandon Victor Dixon. The latter still being tied for my favorite Judas of all time. And then there's those who work so hard to put together a truly brilliant set that I feel captures the look and feel of a city. I adored the lights on the scaffolding and the dirty appearance of public transit entrances. It reminded me a lot of the less touristy parts of Chicago when I worked there. Some of the song arrangements were brilliant, like the reprise of I'll Cover You and Will I. I don't want this to reflect poorly on them or prevent them from getting work, but I can't help worry, considering Rent Live has been the least successful live show so far and producers don't care about particulars or reasons for failure. And then seeing how sanitized Rent Live turned out, I fear for Hair, as to my knowledge it leans far more into the raunchy and taboo than Rent. I guess we'll find out. Rent killed it! It killed Hair! The bastards! This just in, seems NBC took Rent Live's poor reception as reason to back out from Hair Live, which was slated to air in mid-May. And we know that Rent Live prompted this decision because it's specifically cited in the quotes on the topic. Seems NBC was hoping a star-studded cast could carry a musical through its sanitized and TV-friendly edits and other production problems enough to air in the same time slots as the Game of Thrones and American Idol finales. But as Rent proved, that's not the case. I'm of two minds of this. On one side, Hair is very raunchy and filled with specifically not cable-friendly elements that, given Fox's handling of Rent, I'm not confident NBC would be able to handle without harming the work itself. On the other, I wanted a reason to look into Hair the stage show, and for it to see renewed interest after its far less than ideal adaptation in 1979. So far, we've not had a filmed and widely accessible version of Hair that is representative of the stage show. But now with the quoted intended redirect to wide-appealing and family-friendly titles, I fear we're going to get more cases like Hairspray Live, doing shows with recent or fairly good film adaptations already in existence, redoing already popular and well-known musicals while ignoring the deserving choices that you can't find elsewhere save for bootlegs or soundtrack recordings. But can't say this wasn't foreseeable, as the nature of producers is to be as safe and trend-adhering as possible. I didn't go into Rent Live with high hopes or expectations. Part of me wanted to be optimistic given Jesus Christ Superstar Live and Grease Live, but I feel too spurned by live shows to expect much. It's the exception when they're decent or even great. And needless to say, Rent Live will never be the version I turn to when I want to re-experience the parts that I actually enjoy about the show. That was a long one. Doesn't help that I'm sick, not used to swearing in my videos, and the recording cut out partway through. At least I didn't lose it as I tend to whenever the recording stops. If you want to keep up with the things I make and are involved with, don't trust YouTube. Instead, check out this Discord invite link. There you'll have access to my content stream, you'll be able to talk to me in my NotAVampyre crypt. If you're of the Twitter persuasion, you can also find me at NotAVampyre. Thank you very much for consuming this video, and until next time.